they said, well, you're gonna have a coworker, and they introduced me to this coworker, and it was her, the girl that I saw in the Astral, right? But I wasn't quite certain. So she asked me, do you know, hey, have you ever heard about astral travel? And I'm like, yeah. Why? Because I think I met you in a astral travel experience. Like, are you the girl who were calling me? And then I started to describe her place and the area where she lived, and she said yes. And actually, later on, we had a chance to go to her house, and it was the same place that I saw in the Astral.
Welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. This is Cyrus, and we actually have a really cool guest on today, which is Kensho. Kensho is the author of books like Out-of-Body Experiences by Kensho. I've referenced him before in my books, so you might have heard about Kensho if you have been reading my books, for example. He is an esoteric teacher, a lot of experience with out-of-body experiences, a lot of experience with various really interesting mystical subjects, and I've known him for quite a few years now, and so I've been really hoping to get him on this channel to talk about some of his experiences and perspectives. So I'm going to turn it over to Kensho now. How are you doing today?
Fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to connect with you on here, and I think we'll be able to talk about some really interesting stuff. And just thinking about where to begin, I want to ask you about maybe people who who of course don't know who you are. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to go. I always wanted to know what was beyond this world, and I was looking for answers. And I went to a Catholic school for like 9 years, and I would ask the teachers and the priests about, what happens after we die and these kind of things. And I noticed they never had the answer. So I started to read many books, and when I became older, maybe like in my early teens, I thanks to the internet, I was able to find many sources of hidden knowledge, and I began to read a lot about this. And after many years, I became very involved with this philosophical movement called Gnosis, and I started to read all of these books, and finally I was able to contact a teacher. And by that time, I wasn't very happy with my life. I wanted to I quit my job. I wanted to do something different. And this teacher that I was following, I liked everything he talked about. So one day I had an interview with him, and I said, I want to change my life. So could you help me with that? And he said, yeah, just you have to come and become like a missionary, and to teach all of these topics that you also like. So he invited me to live with him in a town in Mexico, very small town, at the foothills of some mountains. And I lived there for like 3 months, studying a lot of these esoteric topics and practicing like meditation. And I started to have a lot of experiences, and I realized that this teacher was an enlightened master, and he would do many things that had to do with like materializing objects. He would talk to me in my dreams. We would have lucid dreams together. We would have out-of-body experiences, and also, I forgot to say that before meeting him, I began to have a lot of out-of-body experiences. And at the beginning, I didn't know what they were, what these were. And finally, a friend of mine suggested that this was what people called astral projection. And that's when I began to research and learn many techniques. And the first time that I tried the technique, I was able to astral project. And ever since, I was having every night astral projections, and I began to get a lot of experience. And when I was living with this master, the experiences became greater. So, you know, that was the beginning of my spiritual path. And yeah, that's how I got involved into all of this.
It's interesting how things synchronize, because we met around 2014, and that was roughly the same time that I began having my first out-of-body experiences. And I don't know if there was a connection or not, but this was all early 2014. And then for me, it was like something activated, because I began having basically just like you said, almost nightly occurrences. And this continued for a while, then it slowed down into a more stable pattern, I guess. But it's kind of interesting how the out-of-body stuff can just kind of activate. So I want to ask you about some of your experiences that you discovered as you delve deeper into this area. I am particularly interested in some of these concepts of tandem out-of-body experiences, because this is always what people consider to be like really good evidence when multiple people experience the same event. And I was curious a little bit about some of the projects you were working on, and you were telling me about the first time something like this happened to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, the first time that this happened to me, I was having out-of-body experiences, but I mean, I call them astral projections or astral travel, but you know, it's the same thing. I didn't know if the people that I was seeing in the astral were real or were like projections of my subconscious. So one day, I remember that I was having this really cool astral travel, and I was like floating in my city, you know, flying through the air, and then somebody called me. You know, I was like up there in the sky, and suddenly I heard a voice calling me over, and I looked down, and there was this girl, and she was calling for me, and automatically I began to descend, and we began to talk, and she invited me to her house. And you know, this was in the astral world. I mean, I'm talking about the fifth dimension. And then she began to like tell me that she was sad with her life and many sad things. And I was listening, but at the same time, I wasn't considering the interaction to be real, because I didn't know if it was a real person or a creation of my subconscious. I think that was the first time that I met somebody, let's say, real in the astral, right? And because I've also seen let's say, my parents, when I was having these astral travel experiences, I would see my parents, but they were dreaming. So I would see their astral bodies, and I would try to interact with them, but you could see that they were dreaming, and they were not even like seeing me in the astral, because they were seeing the stuff they had in their dreams, right? So okay, so this time with this girl, I thought like maybe it's like a creation of my subconscious, and then I woke up and I continued my life as normal. And by that time, I was about to get hired by a company, and I got hired by this company. And this was about 1 week after this incident. And they said, well, you're gonna have a coworker. And they introduced me to this coworker, and it was her, the girl that I saw in the astral, right? But I wasn't quite certain. So she asked me, "Do you know? Hey, have you ever heard about astral travel?" And I'm like, "Yeah. Why? Because I think I met you in a astral travel
Oh
experience."
man.
I was like, "Are you the girl who were calling me?" And then I started to describe her place and the area where she lived, and she said yes. And actually, later on, we had a chance to go to her house, and it was the same place that I saw in the astral. So so that was the first time that I met and interacted with a person in the astral, and that was before I even met that person in the physical world. Yeah.
That's a great story. I'm so happy you were able to share it on this channel, because I think people will love to hear about that. And that goes to show you, because I mean, I've had experiences where I've been able to verify people, but I haven't had an experience quite like that. But these types of things do happen. And it also brings up a very interesting point, which is the difference between people who are in your subconscious and the people who are just like you and me, independent souls, and how we can meet both of these types of people, and one being kind of in the lucid dream state and the other being in the true astral projection state. So do you see a difference between those states, and how can you tell the difference between real people and when you might be having a kind of a dream experience?
Well, the way I see it, have you ever seen? Well, maybe many people haven't seen this movie, but it's called Existence, something like this, with Jude Law.
Yeah, I saw this a long time ago. I know about this one.
Yeah, well, there's a scene where he's in the video game, and he's interacting with some of the video game characters, and some of them they get stuck like a bug, and they repeat the same things, and they can't interact further. They don't have like more answers. And Jude Law mentioned something like, "Oh, this is like a basic character without further programming," something like this. Well, in the astral world, in the dream world, I mean, because the astral world is also the dream world, and it's also the same dimension where dead people go to. And when these are creations of the subconscious, um, you ask them, you can ask them personal things like how old are you, or where are you from, these kind of things. And when you ask them about these things, they get stuck. They don't know how to answer, because they are just dream creations. They don't have a life of their own. And I tried that these many times, that when you are not sure about who these people are, then just ask them personal things, and they won't know how to answer. And the difference between characters from the subconscious and real people is that, for example, somebody who is dreaming probably won't have many answers, but to begin with, it seems that person can't hear you correctly, or just it's that person who is dreaming in the astral world seems to be distracted with something else, like they are seeing images of their subconscious. And so you ask them questions, and they seem to be into something else.
Yeah,
And the real people that are, let's say, awake or lucid in the astral, they will interact with you like perfectly. You can ask them questions. You can have practices. You can choose to go somewhere with them, and they will follow, and they will provide feedback. And these are the people who are also having an out-of-body experience at the same time, and who know it and are lucid.
they could be having an out-of-body experience, or also they could be a permanent resident, so to speak, somebody from that side, perhaps somebody who is deceased, right?
Yeah, I've also seen deceased people. Like, I've talked to my dead grandmother and other dead relatives, and yeah, like the interaction changes, because when the person passes away, maybe many times at the beginning, the person is not aware that he or she has just died, and maybe even let's say, reliving many of the stuff that happened before they died. Something like this happened to my grandmother. I mean, she was not in pain when I saw her in the astral world, but she was worried about a debt that she had, and this really was something that made me anxious about it. And then I asked my mother about this, and she confirmed it. And but the debt was paid off, and after that, I saw my grandma again in the astral, and she seemed to be completely adapted to the astral world, and I was like very happy with it. And something that I've seen is that once the person adapts to the astral world, I mean, once the dead relative adapts to the astral world, that person seems way less concerned about the physical world, and also seems to have less attachments. You know, like they don't get overly excited when they see you, and that's like, why? I mean, mom or grandma, aren't you excited? And this can put some people off, but in reality, it just means that in the astral, the world is so free and so, let's say, without attachments, because it's a dimension with less laws, that that it's easier for people to move on. And in the end, attachments are just a cause of suffering. So a person who's really a person who passed away and is really, let's say, well adapted to the astral world will show a little bit of indifference when seeing that they're dead relatives, but it doesn't mean they don't love them. It's just that they feel less attachments now.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I'll add to that because I was inquiring about this with my mom. I still see my mom at least once a month, sometimes once a week, and I had an experience while I was asking her about how it's a big deal for me to see her, but it's not such a big deal for her to see me. But she actually explained to me that she sees me all the time because I'm going over there all the time without bringing back memory. And so I'm only bringing back memory if I'm astral projecting. So I asked her, when my experience ends, do I just disappear? And she actually described that as no. She said that you still stay here with me, and you maybe will disappear at some other time, but you continue to be here. So it's like I'm there all the time with her, yet she doesn't. I don't have full memory of it. So I think that that's another interesting element on that same topic, because sometimes they're not so surprised to see us because they might be interacting with us kind of multidimensionally all the time, but we just don't have the full memory of it. So in addition to that, I also want to ask you about, so as you delve deeper into the subject of going out of body, it led you to a lot of really interesting work, and this involved building a temple. And during that building of this temple, I know you also were engaged in some more kind of tandem out of body experiences. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, have you ever heard about like energy vortexes, or I don't know, like the pyramids?
Yeah, I've learned actually a little bit from talking to you in regard to how the pyramid, for example, or a pyramid or the pyramids are designed on a sacred geometric level to channel final energy down so people can use that to induce spiritual experiences or healing or things like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, like of course the pyramid, the shape, the way it's made, all of that, it attracts, it becomes a vortex. But there are many things that create a vortex, such as like a star alignment, also like some energy centers that come from the ground, and there are many things and many places in the world that have these energy vortexes. For instance, when I was in the US, one very strong energy place is Yosemite. And in Yosemite, not only the whole park has like this great energy, but it has specific energy points that could have vortexes to other dimensions. And so what we did in when we created this temple is that we used an ancient technique in which the temple is built underground, because it's supposed to be like the womb of Mother Earth. And so we digged we dig the ground, and we made a temple with this sacred geometry. It's got the shape of an 8, and well, we created this place, and we started to do practices in there. It was designed by my guru, by my spiritual teacher, and he chose this place. He said, you know, there's this energy grid that focuses in here, and you know, when you go to this place, for instance, I can't sleep very well. You know, I can't relax. My mind can't relax, and I just feel a little bit anxious. And the reason for that is because the place got a lot of energy. So one day, I told my guru that I wanted to have like a very deep past life experience, and he said, "Well, we could do this through astral travel." So we set up this tandem practice in which we put some mattresses inside the temple, and we went to sleep there. And before sleeping, we did many practices such as meditation, and then we did mantrams for out-of-body experience, and then, you know, everybody went to sleep, and the master, he gave us instructions like, if you're able to astral project, then meet me in the middle, and I'll show you your past lives, right? And so I had like a lot of problems sleeping that night, but in the last hour, I started to feel very sleepy. And this is something that is also good when you want to astral project. Like, for me, the best times is like when you can't sleep the whole night, and then when the time to get up is coming, you start feeling like super sleepy, and then you start falling asleep. That's the best time, because it seems your body is really tired, but your mind was kind of awake because you couldn't sleep the whole night. Well, something like that happened that time. And I was able to astral project inside the temple, and I met my guru, my master, in the middle. And I said, "Master, I'm here. Show me what you have to show me, right?" And then he told me, like, "Look over there." And there were some curtains in the temple, and these curtains were also in the physical world, right? And then they opened as if it were like a theater. And then I saw a Gothic cathedral, and I heard some bells, some bells playing, and suddenly I started seeing people dressed as if they were dressed from clothes from the like medieval times, you know, and I realized we were in Italy, because I started to talk in Italian with some guy that I saw there in front of the cathedral. And you know, to be honest, I speak Italian. I learned Italian, and my Italian used to be much better. By that time, my Italian wasn't that good. And so one thing that I realized is that in the astral world, you can speak and you can listen to languages, and you will understand that it's something different. It's like telepathy. Because putting that aside, I had a recent astral lucid dream lately, and I was talking in Slovak to some guy, and you know, we lived in Czech Republic, and I didn't learn anything. And Slovak is, well, it's pretty much the same as Czech, and I didn't learn in Czech, and I was completely talking Slovak in another occasion, right? So okay, going back to this experience. So I was talking to this guy, And I asked him what's going on, and he said, well, there's a wedding, like a royal wedding. And you know, then I saw the whole wedding and the people dressed in their medieval armor. And then you know, it looked as real as being in the physical world, but the difference is that everything had like an aura, you know, like a rainbow aura, like a lot of colors, very colorful, but also subtle in a way. Like, you know, all of these auras wouldn't distract you from the whole image. It was pretty. It was more real than being here right now. You know, it was a pretty cool experience. And then I woke up and we discussed the experiences, and it seemed that in this group of about 5 people, I was the only one who was able to astral project that night, apart from my guru. And yeah.
And your guru was able to say basically, how was the wedding last night, or be able to verify what happened?
Yeah, like there were some parts in the wedding that indicate me that that I was part of this like royalty. And after the first scene where I was seeing the cathedral and the procession taking place outside, I was transported to another scene where I was inside a building, like a, of course, medieval building, and I saw people signing documents with a, you know, with a feather and ink, like they used to do before. And probably I was there for like 20 minutes. Like they actually felt like 20 minutes, and I was only looking at the people doing this paperwork. And at the end, there was this Italian lady that seemed to be like a relative, and she came and said, like, you know, in Italian, like, how are you? And she came and hugged me, and after that, that's when I woke up, right? So I was able to confirm the experience with my guru, and I said, hey, what's going on? And he said, like, well, in that life, you went back to a past life where you were a member of like the nobility, and you were getting married. So that was a wedding you had, and the importance of this event is that something like that is going to repeat. And what happened is that I think a few months later, I had a girlfriend, and it seemed that perhaps this girlfriend was the woman I married in that life. I don't know, because even in this experience, I didn't see her. You know, I didn't see the bride, and I also didn't see myself with a how you say, with the suit. You know.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's one of these experiences that was, let's say, in Tandem. I mean, my guru showed me the scene in the astral world. He knew about this, and you know, I also went to the past. You know, like I saw a past life existence as colorful and as real, even more real than here in the physical.
So there's a big question on my mind, and it may be on the minds of viewers as well, which is this experience. Would you say it was like a hologram of a past life, like, you know, like the Star Trek holodeck, or was this like in the actual astral world? Because you described it as being in the astral world, but I'm also thinking, well, it's like a projection of the past, in which case would the people be more like dream projections, or is it too confusing to understand? Like, do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah. Okay. So when the curtains opened, you know, inside the temple, and I saw the cathedral, this part looked like a hologram. You know, like I was still in inside the temple, but I was seeing like the cathedral inside. So it was like a hologram projecting. That's what it looked like. But then when I began to talk to the man that I saw there, in that moment I was gone completely to the medieval times. I mean, everything just looked like the Middle Ages. So I was no longer in the temple. I was in medieval times, in a medieval city, seeing everything in first person. Yeah, I saw everything in first person. That's why I told you I didn't see myself like with the suit on or something like this. I was there like in first person, but you can also get other types of interactions because, as I told you, I asked this man like, "What is this?" And he said, "Well, the noble, one noble is getting married, and that noble turns out that it was me." So I mean, why didn't he recognize me? I think the experience adapts to the like it's like a very interactive experience that you can have people explaining you what's going on and whatever, and you don't know if that person was real or perhaps he was a person that was there, but now he's getting let's say used by the experience to explain things. I don't know how exactly it works.
I mean, I feel like it's Star Trek. Yeah, did you ever watch Star Trek? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, it's the Star Trek holodeck, and so instead of a computer or the enterprise computer making the experience, it's, well, I mean, it's a divine intelligence, or it's your higher self creating what is, of course, an akashic experience. So it's almost like it's a hybrid, or it's a different type of experience than a normal astral experience. It's a past life holographic kind of holodeck experience, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it's like in this dimension, in the fifth dimension, there are less laws. So sometimes, for example, we want to imagine how we could look at these things, and many people, depending on their imagination, will say like, "Oh well, I would like to see a past life experience through a TV screen or something like this." But in these worlds, there are less limits, so the experiences are just fuller than what you can actually imagine. That's what I think.
Exactly. So that's really exciting. I know Jurgen, for people watching who read Jurgen's books, he's also talked about these types of experiences, and it's very fascinating. I've never quite had an experience like that. I know I know very little about my past lives, and it'd be great someday to look into that. So I want to shift gears a little bit. So you have a new book out, and one of the things that's really interesting about your work is that you like to go places that I have not seen other writers go. And in your most recent book, which I'll try to get a picture of that up on the screen when I edit the video together. In your most recent book, you talk about experiences in other places, not just what we traditionally think of as the astral plane. You talk about a place called the fourth dimension. And can you talk about some of these concepts with us, and any other concepts from the book that you might like to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as many of you know, the astral dimension, or the dimension where the dead people go to, which is also the dimension of where dreams happen, is the fifth dimension. And our world, I mean, the place where right now it's called the third dimension, or the three-dimensional world. So many people ask, what happens to the fourth dimension, And this place has got a very interesting story, but it's also more difficult to access, because when we visit the fifth dimension, we used a body that is called the astral body. But to go to the fourth dimension, you need to bring your physical body, right? So that's a difficult thing to achieve. And the history of this fourth dimension is that like thousands of years ago, maybe tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years ago, we used to live in this place, which was a dimension between the astral and the third dimension we live in currently. And this place had less laws than our current world. This third dimension has 48 laws, but the fourth dimension has 36. The astral dimension has 24. So when we hear about the stories of elves and gnomes and fairies and magic and Harry Potter, all of those things come from the fourth dimension. It's like a physical place where, you know, all of these things were possible. You know, even magic was like something that was readily available, you know, because all of this, the interaction with this world depended a lot on our imagination and our mind projections, you know. When you're in the astral, when you are dreaming, if you become lucid and you want to think about a particular thing, this thing will manifest instantly in the astral world. And we talk about these things when we refer to the law of attraction, that whatever you think manifests, and it also manifests in the physical world, in the three-dimensional world. But here in the three-dimensional world, because there are way more laws, it takes quite some time, and it requires a lot of things to happen, and it's like a process. So many people don't see these things manifest, because by the time it takes for these things to manifest, people stop thinking about them, right? Or they just discard them because, well, they just don't, these things don't happen instantly here. But in the fourth dimension, you have something in between. So you could say that magic is something like this. Like magic, it requires a lot of believing in magic. You need to have faith in magic, because, of course, having faith in magic also requires your mind and your intention on that thing, right? So if you put your mind on that in a dimension that has less laws than here, these things will manifest. And for instance, you know, I'm not a great fan of Harry Potter, but the world that is described in Harry Potter, I mean, Hogwarts and all of this, you could pretty much say that the fourth dimension is like this. It's a place like this, like the way it's described in Harry Potter. And I've been able to visit this place because after visiting the astral world for many times and many years, I wanted to get my research even further. And I learned some techniques to go to this place, which is way more difficult. And this is what my second book talks about. Talks about these techniques to go to the fourth dimension. And the book also talks about the hidden history of mankind. You know, it talks about the previous races, such as the Atlanteans, Lemurians, Hyperboreans, all of these concepts that might be maybe new for our audience. But I talk about these things because this has to do with the process of how we left a higher dimension and we reached a material world. And the first material world that we interacted with was the fourth dimension. And then we lost this world because our evolution and let's say materialism was becoming stronger. So we had, many of you have heard about the pineal gland, and this was something that was very active in those times. And this third eye was precisely the organ that made possible to manifest our thoughts, you know, faster and easier. And this organ became atrophied, and we finally ended up in this third dimensional world. So my book talks about many techniques to be able to go to the fourth dimension. And also another concept that is not necessarily go to the fourth dimension, but be in the border between the three-dimensional world and the fourth dimension. And we call this thin place. You know, a thin place is a place where the veil between the physical world and between the third dimension and the fourth dimension is very thin. This is like a concept that is very popular in Irish culture. They talk about thin places. So my second book also talks about where to find them and how to find them, and the kind of interactions and what you can feel if you go to a thin place.
And so when you're interacting in the fourth dimensional layer, does that mean that your physical body has disappeared temporarily? What's happening on our side?
Yeah, like I've never been able to. The times that I've traveled to the fourth dimension were so. I mean, it's kind of difficult to achieve, and it's so difficult that I never thought about recording myself. Probably that was something that I thought I was going to do once I got plenty of experience doing so. But it's something that it's quite hard, and it's also very random to be able to actually record the experience. But I know from my guru that yes, when you go to the fourth dimension, you disappear from the physical world, and I can tell you that when I lived with my guru in those 3 months, there were many times in which he would suddenly disappear from the house because he was completely able to do this. So there was just one door, one door in the house. And last time we would see him, he was in the house, and we never saw him leave. And we would look around in the whole house, and he was nowhere to be found. And his wife would tell us like, oh yeah, he just went to the fourth dimension, these kind of things. So yes, if you go to the fourth dimension, your physical world, you disappear from the third dimension, in short, that's what happens if you go to the fourth dimension.
And so I do have a question, because I have astral projected many times to environments where it seems like on the astral side there's these different layers. And so yes, I've been on levels where it's more physical, so you don't immediately manifest something when you think about it. Where actually I've talked to people on those levels, and it's sometimes like strangely similar to this world. And yet I've also been on levels where things do manifest very quickly, and it's explained to me that this is a higher astral environment where it's more thought responsive. And so would this fourth dimension though be kind of similar then, because to these kind of lower astral dimensions? And are you familiar with those concepts?
Yes, I'm very familiar with that, because I've also experienced what you're mentioning, exactly as you mentioned it. And I've actually asked my guru about this. And yes, the answer is that there are many layers in the astral world. So for example, esoterically speaking, they say that the fifth dimension is divided between the astral world, which is the lower astral, and the mental world, which is the higher astral or the upper astral. And but of course, these are like that's the big picture of it. But in reality, there are layers and layers and layers. So I've also there are times where I have astral travel to places in the astral world that seem very physical in a way. And it means that it's like a layer that is closer to the fourth dimension, but you are experiencing it with your astral body. Yes.
And yet even those it's like every single layer, because we might conceptualize that and in some ways minimize it and not understand the full ramifications of that, because what I've come to find is that any individual layer could have entire civilizations. It could have an entire area the size of this planet, or it could be literally matching the cosmos of our entire cosmos, which is unfathomably big. And so that just gives an example of the size, the spectrum we're talking about. Can you relate to that?
Yes, what you're talking about is what you're saying. I mean, that for example, when we talk about the astral world or the dream world, this is like the big picture. We would say this is the collective, the way in which our collective consciousness can understand it. But there are many layers, many worlds between those between that dimension itself, and also it's like a radio stations, you know, like let's say you're on the radio and you change the frequency of the FM band. Let's say that the astral world is the FM band, and you have many channels, you know, between that band. And let's say the fourth dimension might be like the FM2 band, and the physical world might be like the AM band. And you know, there are many channels. The same thing happens in the astral world. And for instance, I'm going to tell you something very curious that I figured about the astral world. And most of the time when I astral project, you know, I do this at night, but I don't see many people astral projecting. Like when I go out in the astral, most of the time I don't even see people, you know, most of the time. So this doesn't make sense if you think, you know, there are millions of people sleeping right now. So what's the answer for that? And the answer for that is that each person is in the astral world, but in their own channel, you know, like somebody will be dreaming something, and that person will be in a specific channel in the astral world, and then another person will be dreaming something else, and that person will be in another channel, and you will be astral projecting, so you will be in another channel, and in the end, when you are able to see people or to interact with them, is because somehow, let's say, because of the things you were thinking, or you know, law of attraction, or different factors, then you become suddenly part of the same channel, or the channels overlap, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly what you mean, but it could also be that a channel may be somebody's individual lucid dream environment, in which case there may be nobody else in that channel except just themselves, right? And
That's also possible, but there are also collective channels, I would say.
yeah, exactly. You could say, for example, I often visit essentially a replica of this entire planet, and many people who also do out-of-body experiences go to this same channel, and we could almost say like this is like a very popular channel because there's so many people from this planet living on that particular channel. And but yeah, but it could, there's so many variables about where somebody may end up, but there is these what we call consensus environments, right? So I want to cover a couple more topics real quick before I open things to the audience. There's a few people in the chat, or in the few patrons participating here right now. So I want to get to you guys shortly, but I want to ask you real quick. So with Atlantis, Lemuria, those topics, was, for example, Atlantis on the fourth dimension?
Yes. You know, the Bible says that Adam and Eve, they lived in paradise, and they were expelled from paradise. And people understand this in many ways. Like, many people understand that paradise was like heaven. But if you ask, let's say, Christian people, they would tell you that this paradise, and I think even the Bible or something mentions that this place was in this world. They don't mention this place being like in heaven, let's say, right? So all of the esoteric authors and also some religions like in Hinduism, they refer to this world. I mean, perhaps they don't call it necessarily the fourth dimension, but this was like the way the physical world used to be. So these stories, such as Adam and Eve being expelled from paradise, refer to how we lived in this like paradise place in the physical world, and due to our fall, which is something that
And we're back. I actually fell into the fourth dimension. It disappeared for a moment. Now I'm back and reconnected to this chat with Kensho. So anyway, Kensho, so fourth dimension, Adam and Eve, going through history, was Atlantean part of this fourth dimensional subject?
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to wrap it up this way. Have you ever talked to a how do you call them, archaeologist?
Have I ever talked to an archaeologist? Well, I mean,
Yeah,
probably at
I mean,
some point.
I had a conversation with an archaeologist from the University of Dublin some months ago, and I wanted to know how much do archaeologists really know about the history of the world and of ancient civilizations. And so we talked about carbon 14. Is that the technique they use to know the dates? Carbon 14, and all of these things. And what he explained me is that these are the tools that they have to measure, let's say, monoliths or ancient artifacts or whatever. And as you know, when we study the the histories of our, let's say, the Homo sapiens and the Homo habilis and the previous, let's say, humans that existed, there are always missing links. And the truth about this is that what I understood from talking to this archaeologist is that science and archaeology and all of these, let's say, sciences, they actually know very little about the history of the world, because reality has a lot to do with the way the collective is thinking, right? So if you don't believe in something and you make people like not believe in something, then you will never find this something, right? So but in esoteric studies and in, esoteric studies such as astral projection and going back to the past through means that science can't explain, you understand that humanity is more ancient than that you could ever imagine. We've been having millions of years of evolution, and the way that in esoteric beliefs, humanity is like a U, like you see this and just think about a U, and we start here on top of the the curve, and in this phase we are like not material, and then we start materializing more, and then we are right here in the middle right now. This is where our current humanity is, in the most material phase. And then in the future, our evolution will lead us to a more spiritual, let's say, evolution, right? So in this, as you can see, there was a descent, and in this descent, before we lived in this three-dimensional world, there were races that were living in the fourth dimension, and those were the Lemurians and the Atlanteans. And these are things that many psychics and many people who study this hidden knowledge talk about. And this is something that I have also researched myself in the astral world. So in short, regarding your question, the Lemurian civilization used to live in the fourth dimension, and they were the first who began to fall. And after that, the Atlanteans, at the beginning of their civilization, they also lived in the fourth dimension. But by the end of their civilization, they were already living in the third dimension. And by that time, our current race, which in esotericism is called the Aryan race, was already existing, and we were basically the offspring of the Atlantean race. And by the end of their civilization, we were interacting with them, and then their civilization came to an end. But there's something very interesting, because there were few individuals who still had this pineal gland very active, and who still were very spiritual and were not so materialistic, and they hadn't fallen into the, let's call it sin, or whatever you want to call it. And these individuals, they began to interact with the third dimensional world. They began to interact with many of our, let's say, modern civilizations. I mean, the civilizations that we know historically. And then they saw the chaos that this race was bringing to the world. And these races decided to go back to the fourth dimension, and they were able to do this through many means. And they are living right now in the fourth dimension. And one of these civilizations were the Mayans. As you've heard, by the time the Spanish conquerors arrived to Mexico, the Mayans, they said that the Mayans were already gone. I mean, there were Mayans still living there, but the main civilization was gone. And
The Mayans, correct?
Yeah, the Mayans. And so many esoteric authors, they refer to this as you know, they transported themselves to the fourth dimension. And many civilizations still live in the fourth dimension, even civilizations from the previous races of mankind. So
yeah, there's a guy I sometimes cite who, controversial guy, Corey Good. He claims he's been on a Mayan spaceship. He said it looked like a spaceship built of solid stone, and that he was meeting Mayan people in space. Maybe he was having an astral experience. I don't know, but would that make any sense with what you're saying, that these civilizations, they could have ships and be interacting with our dimension through those ships or things like that?
yes, like in this sense, they, in esoteric studies or in spiritual studies, we say that there's something called universal charity. And it means that there are many civilizations in the universe that are way more advanced and more awakened than we are. And these civilizations will try to help us because of this law of universal charity. So many of these space civilizations, I mean, civilizations from other planets, they've come to our planet, I mean, since thousands of years or maybe millions of years ago. And they have guided our evolution. They have helped us. They have helped to guide our evolution. And one way in which they have helped in our evolution is to live with us and to let's say, to breathe with us, It's like a, let's say, interracial, interplanetary union. And we could say that the races that we have in the world are the offspring of the union of many races from other planets. And the Mayans, now that you talk about this experience about this guy that is very controversial, I had an experience once in which I saw like this spaceship in the Astral, which was full of Mayan symbols. And it also I came to the same conclusion, like this came from another planet. And I remember I was once talking to my guru way before I had this experience, and he did mention that the Mayans were one of these space races that came and settled on Earth, and their karma became part of the karma of this planet, and they just became part of this planet. So in that sense, there are Mayans that have developed in this planet, but essentially the Mayan race came from another planet, and it's not the only race in this Earth that also came from other planet. And talking about this, he mentions that these races that came from other planets, their frequency, let's say their energy or their frequency was, let's say, compatible, and that's why they were able to breathe and to become part of our DNA or whatever. And if this humanity keeps evolving, and if our frequency, our energy keeps increasing, then other extraterrestrials will come to this planet, and they will also interbreed with us, because our will be also higher. So we will become more compatible. I don't know if I might make
more multidimensional, right? So yeah, it's interesting how well all of that lines up with other areas that are, you know, very, very different authors and people with very different backgrounds, and yet information tends to converge, like the guy I mentioned, and basically he says the same stuff that you're saying. So one last thing I wanted to mention. So how is this converging on this planet? You talk a lot about a new Earth. Other esoteric authors also talk about this. So what is your interpretation of that? So my last question.
Yeah. Well, what happens is that not only in esoteric studies, but in Hinduism, probably is the religion that talk about like the different stages, the different phases that the evolution of mankind is going to have, and they call these yugas, right? So this is a very deep subject, but pretty much they talk about 4 yugas, right? And basically the first yuga, or the first, let's say, phase of mankind is like the golden age. And then we have like a silver age, and then we have a bronze age, and then we have the chaos age, so to speak, right? So this chaos phase didn't start like 100 years ago. It didn't start 1,000 years ago, right? It actually started like, I don't know. I don't remember exactly if you study the yugas, they do have time periods. And I think this current yuga, this current phase of humanity started when I think Krishna, according to Hinduism, when Krishna came to this world, or when he left. And I think it's something about 10,000 years ago or something like this. So in other words, we've been living in this chaos, in this epoch of chaos for like thousands of years. And the chaos is about to end, because a new phase is going to start. So, I mean, it's not a new phase, it's like a new cycle. So, you know, the era of chaos is getting to an end. And then what's next is the era of you know, starting over to the golden age, right? So again, it's going to be like a golden age, a silver age, a bronze age, and again a chaos age, and then start again, you know. So so we are in this final phase, and yes, many cataclysms are happening. The poles are melting, the weather is changing, we are starting to see some let's say phenomenons, natural phenomenons that are becoming more destructive little by little, and things are going to become worse in a way. But at the same time, all of these religions and all of these teachings, they promise hope for the people who are working spiritually. So what I've discovered from talking to my guru and also from my own experience is that now that we are talking about the dimensions, the fifth dimension, the fourth dimension, all of these, they have to do with your vibration, and they have to do with the channel. You know, like we were talking about you have the FM band, the FM2 band, the AM band, and the different channels. Well, where you put your channel, where you put your mentality, that will raise your vibration of, you know, specific individuals who are working on their self-development, and they will not, let's say, go through this phase of destruction. Like eventually there will be a time where most of the population will start living the chaos and the destruction, because most of the people are not really working on themselves. But there will be people who will be connected to this higher frequency band, and they will probably, and it is my belief that we will start to experience and to live again in the fourth dimension. And in the fourth dimension, we will not experience the chaos and the destruction that many people, or like probably 99% of the population, I don't know how much, will experience in the three-dimensional world. So I don't know if that answers your...
No, I've heard variations of this, and I can say is we should pack our bags for the fourth dimension, but I hope it's a higher number than 1% of us. You know, I hope it's...
yeah, me too. Like, I really don't know the number. Like, I'm just, you know, but I, you know, it's my understanding, and it's true. Like, I see it everywhere, that most of the people will actually, you know, because most of the people are just, I don't know, evil in a way.
Well, you know, I mean, I've referenced the book The Law of One. Have you ever read The Law of One?
No, unfortunately, no.
Basically, these alleged ET channeled entities said that to be able to go to the fourth dimension, and basically what you're describing, a person would have to only be 1% more altruistic than selfish. So if you're 51% altruistic, you care about other people, then that would actually allow you to have access to such dimensions. But the vast majority of the population are more selfish than they are altruistic. And that was the main message of that book, which I thought was interesting.
You know, now that you are mentioning, I've heard about this before. I don't know if from that book, but somebody told me this. I think even my guru told me this. And so, yeah, it could be true. But also, like, the reality is that most of the population are, like you are saying, not even 1% more altruistic than they are, let's say, selfish.
And I was watching. There was some interesting videos about this, about how people might think that they are more altruistic, but in reality, if you dig deeper, you'll find that they're definitely not 51%. And I like it because it kind of shows you don't have to be, you know, perfect. Everyone has selfish motives, but just 1% is what makes the difference, which I think is a very, very interesting message. Kind of also lines up with what you're saying. But anyway, I'm going to open things up to the audience now. We've been talking a while, but this is a more complicated interview, so I'm happy I'm extending this out a little bit longer than usual. So to people watching this on YouTube, you know, you're watching Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics, where we talk about this kind of stuff. You can support this channel by going down, hitting that subscribe button, hitting that notification bell. You get to know when more interviews like this come out. And if you want to join these interviews and ask guests like Kensho specific questions and hang out and be part of these interviews, then you can sign up as a patron at, well, you can go to Afterlife University at afterlifetopics.com/university. Or also check out the Patreon page as well. Helps keep this work going, helps keep me going to be able to work on all of this and keep building the community. So any help is always appreciated. With that, I'm going to turn things over to the audience. First, I wanted to bring up Samantha, because Samantha's written a lot of stuff in the chat, so you might have some questions you want to ask first. Samantha, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
Yeah, so I was a bit confused on the concept of the fourth dimension. All of this is a bit new to me. I'm new to studying OBEs and astral projection and the like. But I'm not new to the afterlife in general. But the fourth dimension, from what I had understood from previous literature, was that it was also referred to as the real time zone. So I know that you had mentioned it's denser and it's between our dimension and the fifth dimension. So that part I grasp. But just to make sure I understand, you're saying that we have to actually take our physical body in order to access the fourth dimension. So it's not as though you can astral project with your astral body or your energy body to the fourth dimension. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And but there are also techniques to do this. And in my second book, Out of Body Experiences Part 2, I give a few techniques to be able to do this, to bring your physical body to the fourth dimension. And yeah, that's I don't know. Is that the
any chance you could tease us with like one of those techniques?
Well, it's, you know, it's the technique is quite complicated. Like you would have to read it in my book to understand all the things you have to do. But basically, there is the most powerful one, the one that worked for me like amazingly. It has to do with doing magic. Yeah, it's magic. You know, magic with an egg. So you have to get this specific egg, and you have to do this specific procedure to the egg, and then you have to sleep, put it next to your bed, and when you are about to sleep, you have to do some mantras and some invocations, and also you have to get a second egg and do a similar procedure, but this egg you have to turn it into powder, and you have to put that powder in specific areas of your body, and then when you're in your bed and you're feeling sleepy, you start doing these exercises, these practices, and it's incredible because you're gonna start feeling like you know, electricity in your body, like electric shocks. I would describe it like you know, you will feel like you want to scratch your body because it's gonna start like sting, like I don't know, like itching. But it's a very weird feeling, like a very weird itching that you experience in your body, and then you start feeling other effects, and finally you get transported to the fourth dimension, and well, my second book is very specific about the procedure and the technique and how to get there, and so yeah, it's basically like a magic procedure to do this, and this thing is something that of course it's magic, but there are like entities behind these magics, you know, like this is something so profound, so let's say maybe difficult, or something that requires like a true practitioner, that there are entities behind the procedure that are monitoring you, and that are the ones that will help you to get to the fourth dimension. So so there are many aspects about this that that maybe are difficult to explain, but in a big way, you're getting helped from spiritual beings to be able to go to the fourth dimension. Because
and I will jump in real quick and say, and we're definitely in some new territory on Afterlife Topics, which is great. I will say, always be mindful about what relationships that you develop with other dimensional beings or people in other worlds, because it is the Wild West out there. So always be mindful of those relationships, whether you're trying to access the fourth dimension or practice any kind of magical ability. Always be very, very mindful who you let into your space. For me personally, I don't really open that door for anybody except for like deceased family members, but that is up to you guys. But always just be mindful of that. I'm going to ask if anybody else has any questions. I'm actually going to, I had to mute you, Dee and Keely, because you had a bunch of sound static. So I'm going to unmute you before I forget.
Oh,
So does anybody have any questions for Kensho?
I had a quick question. I apologize for coming in late. I guess I had a problem finding the right Zoom. And I apologize if you already answered this, but in the portion where you were at the wedding, the medieval wedding, and you said it was yourself, is that correct? Pardon me. And you said it was yourself, so were you observing yourself? Was that the situation?
No, but what happened is that I saw some people that were dressed with like an armor, like an iron armor, and this like blue clothes. And the way I saw it when I was there, the way I understood it, because you get a lot of information, not only from people, not only from what you are seeing, but also like you get probably telepathically, you get information. And the people that I saw dressed like this were nobles, and I understood that one of them was my brother, and one of them was an old person, an old man, and I understood that he was my father. So he was, and I understood
Wow.
that he was a king. So that means that I was like a prince.
Right.
And so I was like the prince, one of the prince. I don't know. I think the other brother that I saw was an older brother. So in other words, he would be like the one in the hierarchy to become the next king, and I was more like to become the next duke or something like this. And so yeah, so many of these answers came telepathically. And once the experience ended and I talked to my guru, he explained something like this. And he even said that I asked him which part of Italy was this. And he said it was like in the north of Italy. Like I think he said Milan or close to Milan. So, you know, back then there was not one king, but many kingdoms and many Italy. So.
Right.
Maybe, you know, historically I wouldn't know. Unfortunately, I did study some of it, but there were so many kingdoms and so many kings or whatever. So I was unable to trace this information to see like what you know, to which nobility I belonged to in that existence. But I had other experiences which also led me to understand that I also believe I was also part of other. Let's say novelties, noble kingdoms in Europe, in different countries, in different existences. So yeah, that's something that that I've lived as a nobleman in other existences, not only in one but in many. And this is something that I've discovered in the astral world.
Well, that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Did you ever see that series that was in Spanish on Netflix called Ministerio del Tiempo?
I heard about it, and I thought it was, but I didn't know what it was about. But now you've raised my curiosity. Could you tell us about it?
No, it was fascinating. They would go back into different time periods, and they would actually try to make sure different things that were going to sabotage something that would happen would interfere with, you know, world history. But it was really cool. I think there were 3 seasons of it. I loved it.
Now I will watch it now. You know, I really like to go back in time. I really like to watch historical things, and so yeah.
Right on.
Cool.
Does I'll take a couple more questions. Anybody else have any questions? Just jump in there, and now is your moment to jump in. Anybody else? Make sure I don't have anybody muted. Oh, Keely, I'm sorry. I think I had you muted again. Were you? Hopefully, you are not trying to say anything. I guess not. I don't have. Okay. Okay. So one last go around. Any more questions from anybody? This is like an
There's
Oxford
something.
going once, going twice. What's
There's
up, Kensho?
there's something interesting that I'm seeing here at the chat. Samantha Marie.
So this was Samantha. She asked the question, the first question, and she had asked something about the Egyptians, and but I don't think we got to that question because I guess I didn't know what the context was. So we could try to answer that. I think it was in relation to the Egyptians maybe being on the fourth dimension.
Yeah, I think she's referring to did the Egyptians go to the fourth dimension? I mean, were they transported to the fourth dimension like the Mayans? And the answer is some of them, like the priests and some kings, were transported to the fourth dimension. And well, this is interesting because I think it was in 2016 or 2015. I had the opportunity to go to Egypt, and we visited the pyramids. And I went there with my guru, and we had the chance to do this magic or this procedure inside the pyramid of Cheops. So as destiny happened, we made it inside the pyramid, and you're not supposed to take pictures. You're not supposed to do any kind of spiritual practice or anything. But you know, the guy at the entrance, they always allow you to do whatever you want if you pay them some money. So we just gave them a few dollars, and they let us be. And so we were inside the main chamber in the Cheops pyramid, and we did this spiritual work. And for a couple of seconds, many of us in the group, because we were a group, we felt that we were transported to space, like we were no longer in the pyramid. And we felt many things, such as, for example, a friend of mine said that he felt like an alien entity saying like, oh, they have reactivated the pyramid. And then he didn't say anything to my guru. And my guru said that part of the work that we have done was to reactivate the pyramid. And well, coming to your question, what happened to the people, the fourth dimension? Were they transported to the fourth dimension? Well, when we were in the main chamber in the Cheops pyramid, the place is kind of empty. I mean, of course, most of the relics were stolen, but the chamber looks very like, there's nothing there, like not on the walls, nothing, like something very different from other tombs. And I talked to my guru about this, and the explanation were that, of course, these were not tombs, but a pyramid had many functions. For example, a pyramid would gather the energy to be used for the crops. The pyramid would have the energy to make you live longer, live healthier. And from this procedure that he did, we actually, for example, it was very curious, but in 2 years, or like more than 1 year after going to the pyramid and after experiencing this magical procedure, I was super healthy for like 1 year, and I wouldn't go to the gym, or I would go like just once per month or something like that, and I wouldn't lose like body mass. And then my guru explained that what he did had to do with that, that he reactivated the pyramid. So we were enjoying this like extra health from this. But okay, I think I deviated myself from the main topic. But one of the things he said is that many pharaohs used the pyramid to transport themselves to the fourth dimension. So okay, that's going back to the topic. And this is the reason why the chamber looks kind of like rustic in our world, because in the fourth dimension, it's supposed to be like full of gold and full of ornaments, and the treasures are there. And that was one of the reasons why they would always, be buried with their treasure, because the pharaohs from before, like thousands of years, pharaohs who are not even part of recorded history, they used to have the techniques from Atlantis to be able to transport themselves to the fourth dimension. So their treasures would be also transported to the fourth dimension. And the new kings, they basically deleted history. So the history that we know is just part of the history, but these kings made sure to delete the history from previous kings, and previous kings, they had the knowledge to travel to the fourth dimension. And this is something that you can verify if you ever go to Egypt. You will see that in the columns they have the hieroglyphs, and you see that there are hieroglyphs carved on top of older hieroglyphs. So if you ask a guide why they used to do that, and they will explain you that the kings used to try to erase all the information and all the glory from previous pharaohs, because they wanted all the glory for themselves. So that's one of the reasons why there are many, like hundreds or maybe thousands of pharaohs of Egypt that we don't know about, because they were more ancient and they disappeared from every registry, and they had the technology from Atlantis and the knowledge to be able to transport themselves to the fourth dimension.
I have a question, but before you finish, but real quick, does anybody in the audience have a question? Because we're about to finish the interview. So now is your chance if you have something. No? Make sure I don't have anybody. Oh, Keely, I think I have you muted again.
Oh, yeah. Mommy.
Okay, I guess not. All right. So Kensho, do you know anything about any kind of extraterrestrial bloodlines when it comes to the Atlanteans or even the Egyptians, who I'd imagine kind of descended from the Atlanteans?
Like in this sense, all of us, all of the people in the current race, I mean, white, black, Indian, Asian, whatever, I mean, all the races of our current world, they come from the offsprings of the Atlanteans, right? But also from a mixture of many races. For example, they say that I heard my guru saying that the black race also, came from a race that came from another planet. Also the Mayans, and not the same with the Aztecs, for instance. Many of the indigenous peoples that inhabited America did not come from space, but they actually came from Atlantis. Even the Toltecs are supposed to be like there was a race in the Atlantean race that were the Toltecs, and they were probably the most important and advanced race in the Atlantean race. And then they came to America, to Mexico, and settled there. And currently, archaeologists, they talk about the Toltecs as the previous, let's say, peoples before the Aztecs, and where the Aztecs come from. But the reality is that archaeologists don't have a lot of evidence of who the Toltecs were. And it seems that many peoples would call themselves the Toltecs, or call themselves to be the like the great-grandchildren of the Toltecs, because it seems they had something to admire from the Toltecs. And the explanation is that the real Toltecs were part of the Atlantean race, and they settled in America. So it's a combination of our current races are a combination of the Atlantean offspring, and also from extraterrestrials. For example, they also say that the Nordic people originally also came from another planet. Many people point to Venus, planet Venus. And I would say it's maybe a combination of that plus offsprings from the Atlantean race. And we are all pretty much, very much combined. All the humanity currently, we're all pretty much like a mixture of Atlantean offspring and also from extraterrestrials. And this is something that has happened to our race. and that happened to the previous civilizations like Atlanteans and Lemurians. This has been going on for maybe millions of years. And as far as I understand, the first time there was like a cross between an Earth race and a race from space began with the Lemurians at the end of the Lemurian era. And that's when the first time that extraterrestrials started to cross themselves to breed with let's say people from Earth.
Yeah, I mean, it's like insiders say, it's a huge genetic experiment continually happening on this planet, which is very interesting. And that's a whole other topic that
Yeah,
probably both get into. There's a lot of crazy stuff in that area, but probably just have to get you back on the show at some point, because clearly we can just talk and talk. So that being said, what's any final things that you're any next things that you're up to, any other projects planned, anything you want people watching to know about?
well, I'm currently doing a lot of experiments to be able to have more visions and astral travels to the Akashic Hall of Records to get more information about Atlantis and maybe after that about Lemuria. And so I'm gathering information. I'm having experiences, and but this time I'm actually focusing on writing a novel. So I'm writing a novel right now, and it's going to be a novel. It's going to be science fiction, but it's going to have a lot of stuff based on what I've seen, and also the esoteric knowledge that I know. So all of that is going to be hidden there. So nobody's going to know what's real and what's fiction. But in the end, it's going to be a novel. So you could say that it's going to be fiction, but based on reality,
Yeah, right, for sure. And definitely excited to see how that goes. Although fiction writing is a daunting endeavor. I've written a couple of fiction books myself, and it is a challenge. But if you can get into the flow of it, it can, like anything, it can come naturally if you can put yourself with those characters, I guess. So, but it is a challenge. But anyway, I guess that about wraps up our interview then. So thanks so much for coming on. This is my old friend Kensho, coming to us from a nice beach in Mexico, where he tends to always be. And that's about it for this show. So thanks everybody for watching, and be sure to go down, hit that subscribe button, check out afterlifetopics.com, and stay in touch with the community. Head to the Facebook group at Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics, where you can chat with Kensho as well, who also posts on there. And I will see you all in the next video. Thanks, Kensho.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kensho. That was great. Appreciate it.
Thanks to all the
Take
patrons.
care.
Thank you.
And see you guys next time.